The good old boys are back in town, and they're here to stay. That's this week on Motoring 98.
TSN's Motoring 98 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas for new, longer-lasting, performance-friction carbon metallic brake pads.
This week we are at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, or as it's more affectionately called, the Brickyard. Hello everybody and welcome to Motoring 98. You know, for many, many years, since 1909, this has been a one-race track. Mind you, that race just happens to be the biggest one-day spectator event in the world, and of course I'm talking about the 500. But 4 years ago, the good old boys in NASCAR moved into town for the Brickyard 400. Things have changed here. In fact, some believe the 400 could, in time, replace the 500 as this track's marquee race. Even race fans outside of the United States would agree the Indy 500 was considered the biggest and most prestigious race in the world. I say was because life has changed around the old Brickyard. Owner Tony George formed the Indy Racing League, and many believe it has diminished the 500. 4 years ago, George invited the NASCAR boys to include the Speedway on its Winston Cup Series. So history and tradition have made way for the Brickyard 400, and even the NASCAR boys were surprised.
I think it's special for many of the Winston Cup people who have had really no hope of running at this place before, as Dale Jarrett put it the other day. This was before Tony George and Bill France got together and decided to have a race here. And they talk about coming down this front straightaway, and the fact that they're not used to seeing fans on both sides of the racetrack makes it look pretty narrow.
What's happened is it's building mystique. The Indy 500, this is their burial grounds. This is their deal. But now we're starting to build that tradition. You know, pretty soon they're going to call this bump day, and it's the Brickyard 400 now. It's only its 4th year, but one day it'll be the 50th year. It'll be bigger then than it will now.
So the drivers are happy to be on the Brickyard, and the Speedway isn't complaining with another 400,000 paying customers in the stands. But the debate may never end.
These things are taxi cabs, you know, in racing terms they are taxi cabs, and they don't fit. I mean, you have basically one line through the corners. They can't race beside each other the way NASCARs ought to. Sure, you still get great racing. I would never say anything except this is a fabulous show. But at the same time, this is Indianapolis. This is the Brickyard. They don't even sound right.
I think the good old boys should have been here a long time ago. Most probably it's because Indy wanted to keep its open wheel racing formula quite a while, but I think they were bound to come here one day or the other.
Absolutely, this is where NASCAR should be. That's what the track was built all about, was bringing American cars out here for testing so the manufacturers could, as they say, race on Sunday and sell on Monday their wares. And the 5 years ago when Tony George decided to bring it back, it was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to the Speedways, to many, many fans. They come out here, they see something they can recognize, it makes a lot of sense. It's just terrific that they are here.
Indy will always be known for its open wheel formula, that's for sure. But people relate so much to these cars. They know what a Ford Thunderbird is, they know what a Monte Carlo is, and what a Pontiac Grand Prix is. They also relate to heroes. They got heroes here that they've been known and following for so many years. People like Dale Earnhardt, so many people know him, like him, or hate him. Same thing with Jeff Gordon, and the same thing is happening right now with people like Dale Jarrett. They want to see these people in IRL or in kart. Well, there's so many changes, and a lot of European or South American drivers, they're not exactly the good old boys, the good old folks that people know around here. I think that that's a point there that's pretty important in the popularity of NASCAR here at Indy.
Brickyard.
What do you think of NASCAR being in here, though? Is it?
It's great. Yeah, it's great. But I'd still rather go to. I've been to Poconos 2 weeks ago. I can see better. Can see more of the action. But this is historical.
I think you could argue up to now that it was a mistake. I guess you can't argue with the bottom line, but I think it has diminished the 500. There's no doubt about that. Maybe he couldn't have done this thing with ARL without this, so that's a powerful factor. But I still don't think these cars belong here.
Definitely the tradition has been broken. Definitely NASCAR has its feet set here, and definitely it will not move out of here. People are coming here. I'm pretty sure that they're monitoring the place here so that NASCAR doesn't overshadow IRL or Indy, but one day or the other, it's bound to do it.
I've just flown in from Frankfurt, West Germany, and boy, are my arms tired. I'm also upset, and I'll tell you why. Come on up later on Kenzie's Corner.
On this edition of Test Drive, we take a look at the replacement for the lost but hardly lamented Previa. I'm referring, of course, to the all-new 98 Sienna, a vehicle that at long last has got 4 doors.
The Sienna is heavily based on the Camry, and so its influence is found in almost every aspect. The engine and transmission, for example, are a straight lift, meaning a 3-litre V6 married to a 4-speed automatic transmission. Power is rated at 194 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, and 209 pounds-feet of torque at 4,400. True to form, the delivery of power is silky smooth, and under normal circumstances it is more than adequate, returning 0 to 100 km/h times in the 10-second range. Because of the multi-valve design of the engine, the power is found fairly high up the rev range. Consequently, a fully loaded Sienna means a much heavier workout for the gas pedal. Now, before you read more into this statement than needs to be, let me explain. For 99% of the time, you will be more than happy with the performance. It is only in hilly terrain with 6 aboard will you need to delve deeply into the rev range. Fortunately, the 4-speed automatic holds a partial answer. As well as featuring well-spaced ratios and a seamless shift between gears, the box features an on-off switch for the overdrive unit. With the overdrive turned off, the engine's RPMs are appreciably higher.
You don't fully appreciate the Sienna and its qualities until you get it out into this environment. On the highway at 120 km/h, it's smooth, whisper quiet, and it's not at all susceptible to the side winds. Toyota have done a very good job with the suspension and engineering in general.
The front suspension is again a straight lift, meaning gas-charged McPherson struts, coil springs, and a stabilizer bar. The rear suspension, however, is unique to Sienna. Because of the demand for a wide, flat floor in the rear, Toyota have adopted a twist beam setup with gas shocks. Not only does this give the desired floor plan, it keeps the intrusion of the shock towers to a minimum. As for ride comfort, the Sienna is, without question, the new benchmark. It offers a neutral feel and is more car-like than any other minivan, including Nissan's highly rated Quest. Large bumps are swallowed in stride, and the usual jarring sensation produced by expansion joints is non-existent.
A standard feature on all Siennas is a low tyre pressure warning system. Now, this system uses the ABS sensors to monitor the effective rolling radius of the tyre. Should the tyre start to go down, the radius changes, which also changes the wheel speed. Now, it's this change in speed that the system detects and in turn uses to warn you of a potential problem.
Stopping power comes from a front disc rear drum setup with anti-lock. The pedal affords a high degree of feel, meaning the system is easily modulated. As is becoming the norm, the anti-lock system stays out of the equation until it is needed, and when it does intervene, the pedal pulsation is enough to warn but not startle the driver.
Perhaps the single biggest design flaw with the Sienna has to do with the manner in which you remove the seats. You start by folding this thing down and then releasing the seat catches at the bottom and drag the seat back to here. Now, this is where you've got to be careful, because if you're not very careful, you're going to take a big gash out of the bumper. And be prepared, this thing weighs about 70 pounds. There you have it. That's half the seat out, but this is hard work.
Removing all the seats gives access to 3,650 litres of cargo space. Put them all back in, and you're still left with 501 usable litres.
You know, a lot of people shy away from buying the fourth door on a minivan because of the perceived problems when it comes to refueling. What happens if little Johnny opens the door? Well, on the Sienna, it's not a problem because they built in a stop, so you cannot open the door to the point where it contacts the pump handle. That aside, that's the end of this edition of Test Drive. You know what? Toyota have succeeded in creating the Camry of minivans, despite what I said about the seats.
Time to update our long-term Pontiac Transport. So far, we've clocked just over 10,000 clicks, and there's very little not to like. The newly designed Transport has plenty of interior space, and the 3.4 180 horsepower V6 purrs at highway speeds, and the low-end torque is impressive and reassuring in the passing lane. The long wheelbase version offers an additional left side sliding door with a remote power option on the right side. A pet peeve? You'll need extra muscle to close a stubborn tailgate, and we found this problem is not unique to our test vehicle. We'll check fuel economy on our next update.
It's a 1960 Messerschmitt. It's a single-cylinder, two-stroke engine, 191cc, 4-speed, and you reverse the engine because it's a two-stroke to back up, and that, in theory, gives you 4 speeds reverse, too. We used to have the importer for the Toronto area, used to live not too far from me back in 1960, and so I used to go over and look at the cars a lot, and I always really liked them, but ultimately I went to England in 1983, and I bought my car there because they were so hard to find here. Well, it's direct steering. There's no gear. It's just like almost like a tricycle. So if you look into the other lane, you're in it. You know, it's reasonably stable. I can get her up to about 50, 55 miles an hour. It'll hold that speed pretty good. But it's other people's reaction you have to deal with. The people who blow their horn as they're passing you, and you got your window open and sort of like this startled, you know, and or people who don't pay attention to their driving while you're driving your car and just trying to survive on the road. But I think there is a interest in a small city runabout. There definitely is an interest in it because of the amount of people who say, where can I buy it? This is great for running back and forth to work because, you know, it gets about 85 to 90 miles to a gallon.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns dealing with a stuck wheel. I'm sure many of you have found out the hard way that when you get a flat tire, jacking the car up and removing all the wheel nuts doesn't always get the wheel off the car. In many cases, corrosion will literally weld or freeze that wheel onto the car, and the car doesn't have to be that old for this to happen either. If you run into a situation like this, here's what you do. First of all, don't tug on the road wheel in this direction. Don't pull on the road wheel to try and get it off the car. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, you could topple the car off the jack. Secondly, you could fall backwards into traffic, and this happened last winter to a man near Orangeville, Ontario. He was yanking on that wheel trying to get it off, and when it finally did come off, he fell backwards into traffic and was hit by an oncoming car. And it's also not a very effective way because it takes a sharp blow to loosen it. If you run into this situation, just start one of the wheel nuts back on a couple of turns so that when the wheel does come free, it doesn't roll away into the path of another motorist. Turn yourself around and use a sharp blow with the heel of your boot to try and loosen it up. Give it a couple of sharp kicks, and that'll usually free up the wheel and loosen it such that you can change the tire. Now, if it won't, you're likely going to be up against a situation where you're not going to have enough tools on the side of the road to properly remove it. You're going to have to get the car towed in and get it removed. And next week on the Midas Tip, I'll tell you how to avoid this situation entirely so it doesn't happen in the first place. That's your Midas Tip of the Week.
A portion of Motoring 98 is brought to you by the Solder Sealed Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
Blending the thrill of a motorcycle with the safety and comfort of a saloon car is how Mercedes-Benz describes its new concept vehicle. The F300 LifeJet practically does all the driving itself. A sophisticated electronic system uses the vehicle's speed, acceleration, steering angle, and yaw to calculate the exact angle of tilt required in a situation, the maximum angle being 30 degrees. The powertrain is the same 1.6-liter, 102-horsepower four-cylinder found in the new Mercedes A-Class. Mercedes says that public reaction will influence its decision on whether to go into production. How do you spell success? Well, the total purse on this year's Brickyard 400 is close to $5 million, and that's up in just 1 year, close to $300,000. The winner gets over $500,000. The dead last finisher, even if he doesn't get past turn 1, will receive $53,000. You know, there is one person missing here at the Indianapolis Speedway today, and that's Bill Gardner.
Well, Brad, as you know, I'm a big NASCAR fan these days, but prior to being a NASCAR fan, I was a big IndyCar fan. There was a stretch of about 12 years there where I never missed an Indianapolis 500. But with what Tony George has done to that event in the last 2 years, I don't know if I'd walk across the street to see it. So the Brickyard 400, love to be there. And one thing you want to definitely catch if you go to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for either event is the museum in the infield. And one of the big things that they show you when you're in the museum is the crossover between race car technology and how much race car technology has found its way into mainstream cars and trucks. First of all, the rear view mirror is one thing they really key on. The second thing is disc brakes. Now, disc brakes found their way onto the front axles of mainstream cars and trucks in the late 60s and early 70s. Took a little bit longer before you found them on the rear wheels of many vehicles, but today you're finding four-wheel disc brakes on more and more vehicles. Now they've even found their way into light trucks. Now this Explorer is a perfect example. It's a 96, but if you have a 95 or newer Explorer, it's got four-wheel disc brakes. Now the other day at the cottage, one of my neighbors came over to me. He's got a 95 Explorer, took it into the dealership after 72,000 kilometers for a brake job. He fully expected the pads to be worn out and have to replace the pads. What he didn't expect was a bill for $1,100 for its first brake job after 72,000 kilometers. Reason being, they had to replace an awful lot of parts on the rear disc brake system as a result of seizure. Now, what happens with rear disc brake systems, part of what makes them good is also a liability. Because they're so exposed to the air, they cool well, and that's what makes them ideal for race cars, great heat dissipation qualities. But on a mainstream car or truck, it can be quite a liability. Remember that the rear wheels have to continually run in the road spray that's thrown up from the front wheels. So when you're driving in rain and sleet or snow, whatever, they're getting pelted with a lot of moisture and could be a lot of salt and grit and dirt as well. And that can seize up the rear brake mechanism. Now, what tends to happen is the rotor gets stuck onto the hub in here. On the case of the Explorer, it has a set of brake shoes in the hat area, this area here of the rear brake rotor. And you tend to get a lot of corrosion in there. And the caliper can also corrode and seize up and get stuck in its guideway here. And all of these things contribute to an expensive brake job when you take it in for repairs. Now, if you have a vehicle that has rear disc brakes, it's beneficial to take them apart periodically, once early on in its life, to make sure that everything is properly lubricated, because from the factory, some of these items like the hub pilot hole is not properly lubricated, and the rotors tend to freeze and seize on there. You can have all kinds of problems. Now, if you take them apart every year or two thereafter, clean and lubricate them again, this will help this situation somewhat. But believe me, it's a bad situation right from the word go. And if you have the choice, you're better to have a vehicle that has drum brakes on the rear, with the exception of high performance or sport cars. Believe me, on a light truck like this, disc brakes on the rear are a complete liability, especially if you're going off-roading or running on gravel or secondary roads. You're going to have a lot of seizure in the back. Now, my friend John, who had the 95 Explorer, when he wanted to buy it, I suggested he buy a Suburban or Yukon. By the way, John, they got drum brakes on the rear. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 98.
This Sonoma features GM's much ballyhooed third door easy access system. Now, believe it or not, it's mixed blessings. Oh, for sake. I can't get the key out. But it also limits the cargo capacity. See, capacity.
in from Germany, and I tell you, driving in this country back here in Canada is really starting to get on my nerves. I mean, less than 10 hours ago, I'm driving to the Frankfurt airport in the German equivalent of a Chevrolet Cavalier doing over 200 kilometers an hour. Smooth as silk, safe as church, no problems. I get out of my plane, get into my car, get onto the road. I haven't gone half a block. We're in a line of traffic waiting to turn right, and no fewer than 4 cars jumped out of the line, drove in the left lane, and then tried to barge their way back into traffic. What are they gaining? 3, 4 car lengths? What's wrong with these people? Didn't their mothers teach them any manners when they were children? I mean, whatever happened to Canadians' reputation of being polite, friendly, nice people? Now, the Germans have a reputation for being a bit on the aggressive side. Sure, they drive fast, and they've been known to tailgate from time to time. But when it comes to driving etiquette, they've got us beat 9 ways from Sunday. You know, any race car driver will tell you that there are some drivers that they don't mind driving into a corner side by side with because they can trust what they're going to do. Other drivers they give a wide berth to. Well, that's the way I feel about driving in Germany. I'd rather go 200 kilometers surrounded by a bunch of Germans than half that speed over here. We just don't know what we're doing. We're not turn signaling. We're not looking where we're going. I saw a guy the other day driving to work looking through photographs of a summer vacation. What's up with this? You know, the worst thing is I don't know what to do about it. I mean, obviously anybody watching this show doesn't drive like that, do you? But what about people that don't watch this show? What about people who don't care about their driving? How do we get to these people? We can't put a cop in every street corner. We got to find a way to change our culture. Frankly, I'm beat. Speaking of beat, maybe I just need more sleep. And, oh, by the way, Brad, when am I getting my Motoring 98 hat? I'm Jim Kenzie.
You know, there are still a lot of racing fans who are worried that things will never be the same here at the old Brickyard since the NASCAR crowd moved into town. Well, if you took a poll of the hundreds of thousands of people that are here at the Speedway today, I'm sure they tell you that's just fine with them. That's it for now. Make sure you join us next week as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 98 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas for new, longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.